Hey everyone, welcome back into some Entitled People stories. Today we've got 3 tales of people who thought they could treat others as disposable and learned exactly how wrong they were. One involves a manager who wrote up an employee for helping at a car accident, another a step-family that spent decades making someone feel invisible, and the last a company that denied basic accommodations until a court told them otherwise. I was fired for abandoning my post to help in an accident. I just made sure my departure was as inconvenient as possible. This happened when I was 20, home from college for the summer and trying to stack as much cash as possible before tuition came due again. I was already working full-time as a waiter at a lively local spot I genuinely loved. The money was decent, staff actually liked each other, and management treated us like human beings. Still, I figured an extra paycheck wouldn't hurt, so I picked up a second job as a host at a place I'll call Sapphire Wednesdays. From the moment I walked in for the interview, I knew Sapphire Wednesdays was a mess. The dining room was half empty at 2 in the afternoon, and the manager conducting my interview had a pint of beer sweating on the desk beside him. He kept calling the servers rock stars while also complaining that none of them could handle basic tasks. I remember thinking, this guy's either exhausted or clueless, and I wasn't sure which was worse. But the job itself was simple. Seat guests, alert servers, keep the front tidy, smile a lot. I'd been in restaurants since I was 16, so I finished training in about an hour and started picking up shifts. About a weekend, during that weird lull between lunch and dinner, everything went sideways. The dining room was nearly empty, and I was standing at the host stand scrolling through the reservation book when I heard a screech of tires followed by a violent crash. It was loud enough to rattle the front windows. A car had been sideswiped by a semi on the busy suburban road in front of the restaurant and slammed into a telephone pole just beyond our parking lot. Without thinking, I turned to one of the servers and said, "Call 911 right now." Then I bolted out the front door and across the lot. The car was crumpled in the front, steam hissing from under the hood. A woman in her 30s sat in the driver's seat, visibly shaken but conscious. The truck driver was already on his phone with emergency services, and a couple of other drivers had pulled over and were checking traffic. It was one of those rare moments where strangers immediately cooperated without being asked. I leaned in and asked the woman, "Are you hurt? Can you move?" She nodded, said she was okay, just shaken up. Seeing that help was already on the way and no one was trapped, I figured my presence wasn't adding much more than concern. I jogged back inside to resume my shift. When I walked back in, the manager was standing at the host stand, arms crossed, staring at the empty entrance like it had personally offended him. "Where did you go?" he demanded as soon as he saw me. The dining room had maybe 3 tables occupied. "There was an accident," I said. "I went out to make sure everyone was okay." He blinked at me like I'd just confessed to stealing from the register. "Why did you feel the need to do that?" he asked. For a second, I thought he was joking. "Because someone just got hit by a semi," I replied. "It looked bad." He shook his head and told me I had abandoned my post. I tried to explain that the room was nearly empty and I was gone for maybe 5 minutes. He cut me off and said, "I have to write you up for this." I was too stunned to form a coherent argument. I just stared at him and said, "For checking if someone was alive?" He pulled out a little clipboard like he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment. "Company policy," he said, scribbling. "One more write-up in your first month and you're terminated." He slid the paper toward me to sign. I signed it because arguing with someone that disconnected from reality felt pointless. He watched you run out to help in an accident and decided the problem wasn't the crash. It was you leaving the host stand? 5 minutes? Empty dining room? Someone could have been dead. And he reached for his clipboard. That's not management. That's a person who finally found a reason to feel important. That night, I went home and told my dad the whole story over dinner. He listened and then started laughing in that incredulous way where you're half angry and half impressed by the absurdity. "They wrote you up for helping someone in a car accident?" he asked, shaking his head. I nodded. He took a sip of his beer and said, "Son, you don't need that circus. Just quit and put your energy into the place that respects you." He was right, but I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of a calm resignation. I wanted the manager to feel the inconvenience he seemed so allergic to. So instead of quitting on the spot, I waited for my next shift with him. It happened to fall on a Friday night during dinner rush, and I was the only host scheduled. That evening, I deliberately showed up an hour late. The front entrance was chaos. A line of customers snaked toward the door. Servers were darting around with tight smiles, and the manager himself was at the host stand trying to juggle reservations while clearly hating every second of it. When he spotted me walking in, his face turned a shade of red I hadn't previously seen in nature. "Where the hell have you been?" he barked in front of the waiting crowd. I shrugged. "Traffic," I said casually. He stepped toward me and launched into a loud tirade about responsibility and professionalism. Customers were staring, and one couple even exchanged amused glances like they were watching dinner theater. I waited for him to pause for breath and then asked, "So I'm getting written up for this, right?" He didn't hesitate. "You bet your butt you're getting written up," he shouted. I widened my eyes theatrically and said, "Oh no, that's my second write-up in the first month." I looked at him, then at the line of customers, and added, "Guess that means I'm fired. See ya." I turned and walked out while he sputtered something behind me. I didn't look back. When I got home, my dad was on the back porch. I told him what happened, and he just grinned and poured me a small glass of whiskey. We clinked glasses while I lit a cheap cigar, feeling lighter than I had all week. Somewhere across town, a manager who thought compassion was a policy violation was still seating tables himself. That was more than enough closure for me. And our second story. They're not my family and never were. Me, after my dad tried to invite me to dinner with the step-family who rejected me my whole life. I was 5 years old when my dad married Ellen. My biological mom had bailed when I was 3, so it had just been me and him for a while before Ellen came into the picture. Ellen was a widow with 5 kids of her own. 4 of them were already in their late teens or early 20s, and the youngest was 7, just 2 years older than me. On paper, it probably looked like a ready-made blended family, but in reality, it never blended at all. Ellen never really stepped into a motherly role for me. She wasn't cruel, but she wasn't warm either. I was more like an extra piece of furniture in the house, something that had come along with my dad and had to be tolerated. Her older kids made it very clear that I ranked somewhere below stranger. They weren't shy about showing it either, especially when they came over to visit their younger brother. At first, I thought the youngest, Ryan, and I would become close. We were kids living under the same roof, close in age, sharing the same house and backyard. I tried to play with him, asked if he wanted to ride bikes or watch cartoons, but he would just walk away and tell me to leave him alone. Sometimes he'd straight up ignore me like I wasn't even speaking. I remember standing in the doorway of his room once asking if I could join him while he built Lego, and he just kept stacking bricks like I was invisible. The older siblings made it worse. They would come over with bags of candy, new video games, or tickets to a movie just for Ryan. Sometimes Ellen would suggest they take me along. That's when I'd hear it directly. "He's not our brother," one of them would say flatly. "He's your husband's kid." They'd glare at me and add, "Don't make a big deal out of it. We're not babysitting." I learned pretty quickly to stop hovering around when they showed up. Holidays were the worst. Christmas felt less like a celebration and more like a performance I wasn't invited to. They'd gather around Ryan, laughing and reminiscing, while I sat awkwardly nearby, pretending to be interested in something else. I remember one year when one of the sisters whispered loud enough for me to hear, "Why is he even here?" No one corrected her. My dad would try to compensate by getting me an extra gift or taking me out somewhere later, but it never erased the fact that inside my own house, I felt like a guest who overstayed his welcome. The older kids didn't just exclude me. Sometimes they enjoyed making it obvious. They'd talk about the fun things they did with Ryan right in front of me and emphasize that it was family only. Once when Ellen asked if they could bring me along to a theme park, I overheard one of them say, "If he comes, we're not going. We're not pretending he's one of us." After that, I stopped hoping to be included. It was easier to expect nothing than to keep getting shut down. They didn't just exclude you. They made sure you heard it. They said it loud enough, often enough, that you'd stop asking. That's not thoughtlessness. That's a choice, repeated over years. Living like that wears on you. I didn't have grandparents or cousins to escape to. There wasn't some other branch of family waiting with open arms. So I kept my head down and focused on school, on hobbies, on anything that made me feel like I had my own identity separate from that house. When I started avoiding family gatherings on purpose, I heard one of the older siblings say, "It's better without him ruining everything." Another time I caught, "If it was just Dad and us, it'd be perfect." They didn't mean my dad, of course. They meant Ellen's late husband. I was just the extra. By the time I turned 18, I had one goal: get out. I couch surfed for months after graduation, crashing at friends' places and working whatever hours I could pick up. Eventually, I split rent on a small apartment with a couple of guys from work. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe without wondering who wished I wasn't there. I still talk to my dad, just not much. He tries in his own way, but we've never really unpacked what those years did to me. Recently, he called and said, "You should come over for dinner. Ellen's kids are all coming, and some of her extended family, too. It'd be good for everyone." I laughed a little, not because it was funny, but because it was so out of touch. I told him, "They're not my family, and I won't be welcome." He sighed and said, "We might not get along all the time, but we are family." That word has always meant something different to him than it does to me. I told him calmly, "They made it clear I wasn't family when I was 5. You chose to stay anyway. I'm not going to pretend now." He pushed back, saying he made sure I didn't miss out, that he bought me things and took me places. I finally said what I'd never really said before: "You can't buy your way out of me being rejected in my own home. Extra presents don't fix being told you don't belong." There was a long silence after that. I don't think he expected me to put it so bluntly. I don't hate him. I don't even hate Ellen or her kids anymore. I just stopped pretending they were something they never were. If they wanted a perfect little circle without me, they got it years ago. I built my own circle instead, and this time, nobody's asking me why I'm even there. And our last story. My mom worked for a company that denied time off for appointments and worsened her disability. She sued and won. Growing up, disability wasn't some abstract concept in our family. It was just part of daily life. My mom, my middle cousin, and I all have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome type 3, the hypermobility type. That means unstable joints, chronic pain, weird injuries from doing absolutely nothing dramatic, and fatigue that doesn't care what your schedule looks like. Some days we function almost normally, and other days something as simple as getting out of bed feels like we're prying our own bones apart. It's unpredictable, and that unpredictability doesn't exactly mesh well with rigid office culture. When I was a teenager, my mom worked at a company I'll call TJ. It wasn't some massive corporate giant, but it loved pretending it was. The building was modern and flashy, but it sat on a road next to an abandoned pub, a shuttered business that had been for sale for years, and a small mechanics garage that looked like it survived purely out of stubbornness. Mom's job had something to do with tech and data, answering calls and handling systems. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, and as a single mother with a disabled kid, stable mattered. The company absolutely knew about her condition. She'd disclosed it when she was hired and had documentation on file. They also knew she was juggling 2 other jobs because TJ didn't pay enough on its own. Despite all that, whenever she asked for reasonable accommodations, they treated it like she was requesting a gold-plated throne. One of the earliest issues was the chair. Mom worked seated for 7 hours a day, 4 days a week, and with EDS, sitting in a rigid, unsupportive chair can feel like someone slowly tightening screws in your spine. She asked for a specific ergonomic chair designed for people with curved spines like ours. When that was dismissed as too expensive, she just said she'd settle for something softer, even just additional lumbar support. Management told her she could manage without. Not long after, the receptionist, who had no medical issues whatsoever, mentioned she'd prefer a comfier chair because her back felt a bit stiff. Within a week, a brand new ergonomic seat arrived for her. My mom saw it and went quiet in a way she does when she's trying not to explode. She filed a complaint and was told she'd need a doctor's note to justify better seating. The receptionist, of course, had not been asked for one. Mom marched to her GP, got the letter, and handed it in. They eventually gave her a replacement chair, but it was barely different from the original. There, her manager said, problem solved. It wasn't solved. It was barely acknowledged. Time off was even worse. If she had a hospital appointment, she was told to reschedule. "Can't you move it to a weekend?" her supervisor once asked, as if specialists magically opened on Sundays for convenience. She missed multiple appointments because she couldn't risk losing hours. When I had flare-ups so severe I couldn't move, she'd call in and explain I was effectively paralyzed for the day. The response was always the same. "Can't you get a babysitter, or can't her dad come down?" My dad lived nearly an hour away by car and didn't have that kind of flexibility. As for a babysitter, try explaining to a random teenager that if my hip dislocates, they'll need to help reposition it without panicking. Mom would hang up those calls, shaking with anger. She hated that job, but she also needed it. Bills don't care about dignity. Eventually, she reached her limit. She contacted a lawyer and laid everything out, every denied request, every missed appointment, every email telling her to try harder or be flexible. She printed correspondence, dug through old messages, and gathered witness statements. Ironically, her own team supervisor, who genuinely liked her, agreed to testify that management had treated her unfairly. The legal advice was straightforward. She had grounds to sue for discrimination and failure to accommodate. They didn't aim for some dramatic, life-changing payout. They focused on documented damages and physical deterioration that could reasonably be linked to the lack of support at work. Mom underwent medical evaluations, and doctors confirmed that prolonged strain from improper seating and denied accommodations had worsened her condition and contributed to additional complications. One of those issues permanently altered how her lower limbs functioned. The claim ended at £5,000 in damages. It wasn't some massive victory lap in terms of money, but it was validation. The company tried to downplay everything in court, painting her as difficult and overly sensitive. When confronted with documented emails and a GP's testimony, that narrative fell apart. The judge sided with her. After the ruling, she didn't hesitate. She handed in her resignation and walked out. "I should have left sooner," she told me that night. For a while, she returned to hairdressing, which had been her original trade. When that salon shut down, she went self-employed, offering hair and spray tanning services. £5,000 wasn't going to change her life, but it did change the record. The court said she was right. That matters more than money when you've spent years being told you're the problem. She walked out with proof that she wasn't. Unfortunately, the long-term damage from her office job caught up with her. She developed a condition that made standing for long periods excruciating. Even holding her arms up to cut hair became unbearable. Eventually, she had to give that up too. It felt cruel that the very job she'd clung to for survival had taken away the career she actually loved. These days, she works for a wealthy businessman who pays her to deliver products to clients in other cities. She'll drive 3 hours some nights and earn £400 up front. It's not glamorous, but it's flexible, and no one questions her if she needs a day off. She even pays her to pick up alcohol discreetly because he lives next to his very strict mother who doesn't approve of drinking. It's oddly specific work, but it suits her better than fluorescent lights and passive-aggressive managers. She also gets help with bills from her boyfriend, who's an electrician and far more supportive than TJ ever was. Looking back, the lawsuit wasn't about the money. It was about forcing a company to acknowledge that disabled employees aren't inconveniences to be managed. They're people who deserve basic respect. And if TJ ever wonders why they struggle to retain staff, I hope they enjoy sitting in their expensive ergonomic chairs while they think about it. 3 stories, 3 kinds of closure. Story 1 was timing as revenge. The manager wanted strict policy adherence. He got it. An hour late arrival during dinner rush, a theatrical firing in front of customers, and an empty host stand for the rest of the night. The OP walked out to whiskey and a cigar. The manager stood in the gap alone. Story 2 was the long silence. The stepfamily spent years making sure the OP knew he wasn't one of them. They got exactly what they wanted. He left, built his own life, and stopped pretending. Now when his dad calls with dinner invitations, the answer's simple. They're not my family. That's not bitterness. That's just accuracy. But story 3 wins, not because of the £5,000, though validation in court matters, but because of the accumulation. The denied chair, the missed appointments, the worsening condition, the eventual loss of a career she loved. TJ didn't just make her job harder, they permanently altered her life, and when she finally walked out, she had a judge's ruling saying they were wrong. That's not revenge. That's a record that can't be erased. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.